As we continue to unpack and understand something of what the Bible teaches about eternity, teaching on final judgment and hell as a real place of eternal punishment for unbelievers, it isn't a popular or an easy subject for us to discuss. What I've been sharing is a traditional Christian view. It's a traditional Christian view that I would personally not want to deviate from. And most Christians today would accept that as being a standard position of the church. But the Bible sometimes there are different ways that people can approach and understand and interpret things. And more recently, there's been a challenge to this traditional view around eternity for unbelievers being an eternal conscious punishment. And more recently, there's been a doctrine or a theory come into the church called Annihilaism. I have to say that it's not a theory that I agree with or I accept. But for us to understand something of that and what the Bible teaches, I'm going to present the arguments on both sides, and to allow us to understand what it is that we believe, but also understand some of the challenges that we face. Some people, some very well-respected, trusted, good Christian leaders over the last few decades have been teaching and been bringing this idea of annihilaism. And basically what this doctrine is saying is that after the day of judgment, after people are judged and punished, that they would cease to exist. They don't deny the day of judgment, and they don't deny that there is a sense of conscious punishment for unbelievers, but the argument is that it's for a season. And they would draw on references like Philippians 3 verse 19 that says their destiny is destruction. They interpret passages like that as sort of indicating that the judgment would be temporary. They suggest that the idea of eternal conscious punishment is inconsistent with the love of God, and that it's an unjust punishment to punish someone eternally for the sins that have been done in this life. It's out of balance, out of kilter, it's too excessive, it's too heavy a punishment. And the fourth reason that people present that this idea of eternal conscious punishment isn't right is to suggest that the continuing presence of evil in eternity would mar the perfect glory of heaven. Those are the basic arguments that some people have put forward for annihilaism. How do we respond to that if we hold to a traditional Christian view of heaven and hell? For us to respond to those arguments, we can sort of take them one at a time. That passage in Philippians 3, where it talks about destruction, has been interpreted in that way, but it doesn't necessarily mean a cessation. It can refer to the harmful results of the final judgment. It doesn't necessarily mean that there's a cessation of existence. To talk about it being inconsistent with the love of God is to misunderstand the justice of God. We've already looked at how important the day of judgment is, to see that God's justice is necessary to deal with sin, to deal with injustice in this world. And if there is no punishment, then are we saying that people like Hitler and Stalin can escape the judgment that they deserve for their evil deeds in this life? To suggest that the love of God would wipe the slate clean and not punish people for what they've done is to misunderstand that the love of God requires justice. To suggest that there's an inconsistency between sin and judgment wrongly assumes that we know the extent of someone's sin. Whatever we've done, to sin against the creator of the world and the universe is a heinous crime. And the Bible makes clear that all have sinned and all fall short of the glory of God. And the Bible doesn't present degrees of sin. It just presents this sense that sin is sin. We have wronged the creator of the universe and we all stand guilty. And the final sort of response is that punishment for evil is to demonstrate God's triumph. For the idea that the continuing sense of hell would mar God's glory actually doesn't reflect that. For that to continue shows the reality of God's glory, mercy and grace for believers in what they've been rescued from, as well as displaying his glory through that sense of justice for all eternity. So for many of us, we would hold to a traditional Christian view of heaven and hell. And it's good to acknowledge that there are debates out there and there are questions. And as we wrestle with these things and we look at what the Bible teaches, it strengthens our faith. It strengthens those faith muscles when we wrestle with difficult subjects. We have to be honest. We're interpreting the Bible and we have an understanding, a doctrinal understanding of the Bible. And when we get to heaven, then we'll know fully what we only know in part today. But these things should move our hearts to respond. And the idea of eternal conscious punishment shouldn't be something that we celebrate, that we should have a sorrow over, that we shouldn't want anyone to experience that. In Matthew 23, we see that Jesus was moved emotionally when he looked at Jerusalem, and the thought of them going to eternal punishment filled him with sorrow. And if we have love in our hearts, if we share the character of God, then it should distress us that people might go to that. And it should make us hungry and give us an urgency to share the love of God with people, that they would escape that. Hell allows for God's perfect justice to be satisfied. And it should encourage us to worship and thank him all the more, to live with that sense of gratitude and glory and thankfulness for the amazing gift of grace that we have in God. When we think about hell and we think that this is what we have been saved from, we should value that gift of salvation even more. And I think sometimes as Christians we take things for granted. Stopping and remembering what it is we believe and realising what we've been saved from should give us a new sense of excitement and zeal and glory of God.